All right. Welcome on behalf of the 21st Century China Center at the University of California, San Diego, Graduate School of Global Policy and Strategy. My name's Robert Thomas, and it's my honor to introduce one of my mentors, Admiral Michael McDevitt. He is a senior fellow at the Center for Naval Analysis in Washington, D.C. That is a nonprofit research and analysis company. He's been involved in U.S. security policy and strategy in the Asia Pacific for the last 3 decades, in both government and policy positions that following his retirement from the U.S. Navy as an analyst and a commentator. He served as a congressionally appointed commissioner on the U.S.-China Economic and Security and Review Commission, 2017 to 2019. And his book, China as a 21st Century Naval Power, was recently published by the U.S. Naval Institute Press. During his 34-year Navy career, he's had 4 commands at sea, including an aircraft carrier battle group. His last assignment before retirement was as Commandant of the National War College in Washington, D.C. He's a graduate of the University of Southern California and Georgetown University, where he focused on U.S. East Asian diplomatic history. He also attended the National War College and spent a year as a Chief of Naval Operations Fellow on the Strategic Studies Group at the Naval War College in Newport. And so with that, it's great to turn it over to my former boss, Mike McDevitt.
Well, Robert, thank you very much. I appreciate that very handsome introduction, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you here today regarding my new book that Robert just mentioned. I want to start by expressing my appreciation to UCSD's 21st Century China Center and to the UC Institute on Global Conflict and Cooperation for co-sponsoring this event, and in particular to Dr. Susan Shirk and to Vice Admiral Robert Thomas. What I'm going to do is try to do a quick overview of the book with just enough detail, I hope, to prompt questions. I have about 20 to 25 minutes, so please cut me short if I begin to stray into the question time. I think that's the most important, so just cut me off and we'll go to Q&A if I run on. 8 years ago, I was wading through the English version of Hu Jintao's 2012 work report, Don't Ask Why, to the 18th Party Congress, Chinese Communist Party Congress, and came across a statement establishing a national objective for China that it should become a great maritime power. General Secretary Hu informed the approximately 2,200 senior party members in the audience that China, quote, should resolutely safeguard China's maritime rights and interests and build China into a maritime great power. This was a surprise. It seemed to me that this was a new statement from a Chinese leader in its long history that of a continental power, for a Chinese leader to say we're going to become a great maritime power. Little did I realize at the time that Beijing was already well on its way to becoming a great maritime power. So the question is, why does China want and sincerely believe that it must become a great maritime power with a world-class navy? I think the first thing, the important thing here is it's important that this is not just a passing party fancy. This is a serious effort that's been going on for a number of years. Let me briefly list 8 reasons. First, China's strategic circumstances have changed dramatically over the past 30 years. Since the 1990s, the dramatic growth in our economy and dependence on trade, its go-out strategy, have made it clear that the economic well-being of China depends heavily on trade, which is mainly conducted by ships. China, in fact, is the world's top trading nation. Number 2, its global economic interests have created political and security interests abroad. BRI program, for example, including the safety of several million Chinese workers and tourists, at least tourists in the non-COVID environment, abroad, often in dangerous places. Third, several of China's most important security interests are maritime in nature, regaining de facto sovereignty over Taiwan and gaining sovereignty over all the features in the South China Sea, defending China from attack from the sea, something that the United States has historically demonstrated it's uniquely qualified to do. Fourth is growing dependence on raw materials from abroad, oil, coal, iron, oil, as well as China's food security depends increasingly upon food imports. And its global fishing fleet, the world's largest, is an important subset of this point. It's become increasingly dependent on fish to satisfy protein needs of its population. Interestingly, the UN estimates that China's per capita seafood consumption is 90 pounds annually. Fifth, the concomitant requirement to protect sea lanes in case of conflict or attempts to use economic sanctions to isolate China. In the book, I talk about Beijing's sea lane anxiety, something that they write about a lot in their official white papers, defense white papers. The sixth point, U.S. maintains a substantial military presence on China's doorstep that has never served Beijing's interest and for 70 years has postponed the final unification of China. Now, this is all from China's perspective. Seventh point, China's study of great powers throughout history that they have concluded that most of those that have endured for long centuries have been those that were great maritime powers. And finally, the eighth reason is because they can. They have the political go-ahead, they have money, they have talented human capital, they have infrastructure, and a ruthless will to succeed by any measures necessary. The PLA Navy is the keystone of the entire Chinese maritime power edifice. Beijing believes to be a legitimate great maritime power, it must possess a powerful navy because it is a navy that provides the essential strategic support to the entire maritime power ambition. Early chapters of the book cover the transition of China's navy that only 18 years ago was taking baby steps toward blue water operations to one that has become a legitimate blue water expeditionary force today. Let me give you an example. As recently as 2002, that was the first time that the PLA Navy was bold enough to dispatch a single warship and a supporting tanker on a 123-day, 32,000 nautical mile voyage around the world. It was a PLA Navy first. And I say this not to demean them, when I say it was they had to wait until 2002, but to highlight how far and fast they have come since 2002. How did this transformation from a coastally oriented Navy to a globally capable Navy we see today take place in such a relatively short span of years? First and foremost, ample resources and political will. But I also argue that almost 12 years now worth of continuous anti-piracy deployments thousands of miles away from China in the northern Arabian Sea and the far reaches of the Indian Ocean has been a key accelerant to this dramatic rise. The Indian Ocean anti-piracy operations, actually, when you think about them, they're more properly sea lane protection operations, were in fact a blue water laboratory where the PLA Navy learned how to sustain warships on station for many weeks at a time. They mastered the logistics of deployed support, underway replenishment, and that also capitalized on state-owned trading and logistics support companies such as Costco, not the one down the street, but Chinese overseas shipping company, to handle import supply and other logistics. It learned how to command and control ships operating 7,500 nautical miles away from China. It learned how to organize protection operations in pirate-infested waters. It also capitalized on operating in the same waters as ships from the rest of the world that were out during the height of the piracy in the northern Arabian Sea and was able to observe and adapt best practices. This has been a tremendous confidence builder for the PLA Navy. In 2008, when the first task group was dispatched to the Gulf of Aden, no one in Beijing knew for sure how that was going to work out. Would the ships be reliable, or would they end up breaking down and spending days in port? Would the sailors be able to perform well during sustained at-sea operations? In short, would the PLA Navy be able to do this without embarrassing itself and China in front of all the world's great navies? As that turned out, none of these problems have happened. The Chinese Navy has demonstrated to itself and to the Central Military Commission and to the world at large that it can hold its own in this company. This book spends some time on the takeoff of Chinese naval warship procurement that began really seriously just 15 years ago. Since that time, China has financed the building of enough modern warships, 248, around 17 ships a year have been commissioned or launched to create the second most capable Navy in the world, the second most capable Navy in the world. And these are state-of-the-art warships. Now, when I call them the second most capable Navy in the world, I mean capable in the sense of having sustained numbers of operationally reliable, very well armed, very well equipped modern ships. Chinese Navy is well balanced in the sense that there's a good mix of ships and submarines designed for different missions. In this sense, the PLA Navy reminds me a lot of the US Navy. Of course, we don't know how the PLA would perform in combat. We do know that from Xi Jinping on down, the leadership of China continues to harp at the entire PLA to improve training, to conduct more realistic training, and how to operate in a joint service environment. And the China's Navy has not been immune from these very high-level public criticisms. As many of you realize, although it flies the national flag, the PLA Navy's loyalty is to the Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping and his subordinates never let them forget this. It's almost the very first thing out of his mouth, no matter what the occasion when he's making public a speech on the point. The loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. So this is a party Navy, not a national Navy. It's also a very big Navy. It's numerically larger than the United States Navy is today. Yes, counting all the commissioned ships and auxiliaries, China's Navy is the largest in the world, around 340 commissioned ships, whereas the United States Navy, as of today, has about 296 or 7 commissioned. Now, this is still a bit of a shock. Now, the U.S. Navy is still the largest in terms of tonnage and has numeric advantages in almost all the major warfare areas, such as nuclear-powered attack submarines, aircraft carriers, modern air defense destroyers. But China's Navy is gaining here as well, especially since 2017, when Xi Jinping set the goal of becoming a world-class force. He wants to have a world-class Navy largely built and in hand by 2035, which is now only just 14 years away. Neither Xi nor other senior officials have defined what world-class means, but world-class carries the connotation of being second to none, being top tier, or being the best in the world. During the book, I try to put some flesh on the bones and provide a view of what world-class means for China, and I'll get to that in a moment. In 2 chapters, I cover in some detail PLA Navy contributions to China's military layered defense concept. In the Department of Defense in the U.S. and more broadly now because of the acronym, it's called anti-access area denial, but most people know it now as A2/AD, anti-access area denial. Anti-access means keep Americans as far away as you can. Area denial means you have to deal with the Americans that are already right next to China, like the 7th Fleet is, for example. I need to emphasize when it comes to A2/AD, or as I refer to it in the book, counter-intervention, which is a more accurate description of the military effect that China hopes to achieve. I'm not just talking about a Navy to Navy matchup. Too many commentators make the mistake. This is an all-service, multi-domain campaign on both sides. From a Chinese perspective, counter-intervention is a joint campaign. It involves China Air Force, China Force, and a strategic support force. And of course, if the contingency is an invasion of Taiwan, the PLA Army. The anti-access portion of this campaign has received the most public commentary because of China's capability to use ballistic missiles to target a moving ship. But the same mix of missiles and submarines and land-based air that is present possibly in the Philippine Sea as U.S. reinforcements might be rushing to aid in a defense of Taiwan if the U.S. government decided to do that. There are, besides missiles in this A2 part of the campaign or in the AD part of the campaign, there are also a mix of land-based aircraft that have air-launched anti-ship cruise missiles and a whole slug of Chinese submarines, postured, many of them postured probably in the Philippine Sea on the approaches that reinforcements would take coming from the United States, including Hawaii or Guam or elsewhere in the world, coming to East Asia. To make all this work, it takes space-based surveillance for this strategy to work. And as a result, this is the thing that not only empowers it, but the A2 strategy, but it also is the Achilles heel of the concept. Because if China's space-based surveillance doesn't work, anti-ship ballistic missiles can't be launched, conventionally powered submarines can't be vectored toward a target, and land-based aircraft with the anti-ship cruise missiles I mentioned won't know where to go to launch their missiles. Taiwan is an important topic in this book because it is the most credible friction point in East Asia that could involve the United States in a war with China. This book looks at the central role the Navy has in a Taiwan campaign and suggests, despite its current size, it really will be hard-pressed to deal with the entirety of the missions it faces. Obviously, it has to deal with getting the Army to Taiwan. But before that happens, it has to be able to be involved with how to address what I call U.S. first responders. The U.S. forces that are already in East Asia. By that, I mean the U.S. 7th Fleet, U.S. 5th Air Force in Japan, and U.S. 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force in Okinawa. These first responders, if a conflict breaks out, are going to face the entirety of China's military establishment because they're right there on China's doorstep. And so, as a matter of fact, U.S. first responders on any given day are greatly outnumbered and face a huge firepower disadvantage. And this is one of the roles that China's Navy is going to have to deal with, is how does it deal with the U.S. first responders that are in the region, just as China's Air Force is going to have to deal with it, and the rocket force. The book also addresses, when you talk about a Taiwan scenario, a really difficult choice that Beijing's going to face. Should it attack U.S. bases in Japan and therefore make it a highly probable that Japan might enter the war? Why would it attack U.S. bases? Because that's where all of U.S. land-based air power is. At the 5th Air Force I just mentioned, it's their bases in Kadena and Iwakuni. There's the Marine fixed-wing airplanes are in Iwakuni in Japan. And so if China wants to take U.S. air power out of the fight, that's already in the air power in the region, out of the fight, it's going to have to consider, well, should it attack Japan? And in the book, I don't say that they will. I just say that they probably have studied this very closely and wargamed it. But I do in the book assume that they did, so I can go ahead and explore the other range of activities that they have to perform. The book also has chapters on the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. Both these chapters address protecting sea lines. In the Indian Ocean, As I mentioned, China's already doing that when they're doing, at least a portion of it, doing that with their anti-piracy missions. That has become institutionalized over time. It's now, as I said, they've been doing this for 11 years. And in the book, I predict that eventually this force that's there to protect against pirates that don't exist very much anymore, something like will grow into something like a numbered fleet that would be stationed in the far reaches of the Indian Ocean, perhaps something like the U.S. Fifth Fleet that's in the Persian Gulf and that region, using Djibouti as its primary operational base. I highlight the fact that when and this is the main problem that the PLA Navy has. They're a really tough opponent as long as they can operate when they have land-based air cover, when they have their missiles that provide, if you will, an air defense umbrella over their ships. But as soon as they sail out from underneath that umbrella, like going into the Indian Ocean or the South Pacific or what have you, they're very vulnerable. That's why they're building aircraft carriers. They need to bring their air cover with them if they're going to go to global areas when there's a chance that somebody is liable to take a shot at them. Because as it is right now, when they're out there in the Northern Arabian Sea, who has effective air superiority over the area in which they're operating? The combination of the United States and the Indians. So that's something to keep in mind now, that the Chinese Navy is formidable close to home, not so much when they go away. The South China Sea chapter also explores sea lane protection, as well as highlighting the strategic value of the island bases that have been built in the South China Sea. A main reason those island bases were built was to provide strategic depth to protect China's major naval base at the southern tip of Hainan in a place called Jilin. It among other things that are stationed there, that's where their strategic nuclear submarines are. They're SSBNs that carry ICBMs, or not quite ICBMs yet, but carry nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles. That's where they are home ported. So China is very concerned with providing defense in depth to that, and those bases in the South China Sea, among other things, provide that strategic depth with their three main airfields. The book also talks about the leading role the PLA Navy has played in the development of China's creeping strategy that started in 1955 as they slowly but surely gained control of many of the features in the South China Sea. There's still 40 islands occupied by Filipinos, Vietnamese, and Malaysians in the Spratlys that China would like to run off, but they'd like them to make that happen without starting a war. And that's one of the dilemmas they face in the South China Sea. Finally, in the final chapter, I return to the broader concept of maritime power. The more I dug into their maritime power goal, I realized China was not starting with a clean sheet of paper in 2012. This was not a bolt out of the blue aspiration that Hu Jintao sprung on the rest of the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. China already was a maritime power at the time. It was and is a global leader in shipbuilding. It has the world's largest merchant marine. Some 5,000 merchant ships are Chinese-owned. It has the world's largest Coast Guard, some 250 ocean-going cutters, and far and away the largest fishing fleet, motorized fishing fleet, that has estimated to be 250,000, 350,000. Now, they have only about 4,000 of those are capable of going off the coast of South America or Africa to fish. But that portion called distant water fishing boats is also the world's largest. And today, as I pointed out, is also the world's largest navy. So finally, when we go back to Xi Jinping's desire to have a world-class navy in 2035, how big might it be? How big will it be? But we don't know how big because China's warship building goals are still a state secret. So what I have done is I looked at what they have done in the last 15 years. I said, okay, the last 15 years, they built X number of ships. And there's no reason why they couldn't do that again because they've had new shipyards coming online. And they could build X number of ships that they built the last time over the last 15 years, again in the next 15 years to get to 2035, as well as to account for ships, let's say that were built in 2005 or 2006, that by 2035 will be that will be retired from the Chinese Navy. So essentially, I've come up with a size of China's Navy in 15 years of about 425 ships. And that's not counting, I want to make the point, that's not counting minesweepers and other small auxiliaries, small amphibious craft and what have you. This is just major warships. And certainly a 425 ship Navy, by any measure, would be considered world class. My final comment is that because I focused on the PLA Navy, I recognize that that would be an incomplete and unbalanced picture of the totality of China's coercive maritime power. As a result, I included two very well-written appendices, one on China's Coast Guard and the other on China's maritime militia, written at my request by America's leading experts on those subjects, Ryan Martinson, Andrew Erickson, and Connor Kennedy, all of the Naval War College. And with that, I'll conclude my prepared remarks.
Admiral, I really appreciate that book review of your recent work. And, you know, as you rolled through the aspects of this new book, based on the comments, one of the things that comes to mind is that looks like it'll probably be required reading for my strategic studies students in the spring. I'm going to start the discussion with just a few issues that I'd like you to address, and then we'll move it over to Sam and he can pull from the Q&A, because there's been a very healthy you know, discussion going on over in the Q&A box as you've been conducting the book talk. You know, clearly my sense is that you've conveyed a clear message that Xi Jinping is somewhat of a Mahanian disciple, an Alfred Thayer Mahan reader, and, you know, great powers have great navies. One of the issues as they're building a very, very modern Navy, clearly they have the production shipyard capability to build it. So first issue I'd like you to address, and I'll just list three. Do they have the maintenance yards to maintain this modern force? The second issue, and you talked about it, and I thought it was very insightful, the counter-piracy operations out in the Gulf of Aden as a laboratory for can we sustain long-term distant operations. In my days as the 7th Fleet Commander, and you and I have talked about this before, when I met with Admiral Shen, who's now their, I think still their Chief of Navy, was the South Sea Fleet Commander at the time, one of the things that kind of came up in the conversation was this somewhat kind of envious view of the US Navy's professional NCO Corps. You know, this all volunteer force, this mid-level petty officers that you and I have had run our ships. And then the third issue, I think, and this is short of the threshold of major armed conflict, is it appears to the outside observers that the integration of, as you put it, all the elements of maritime power, the PLAN, the Chinese Coast Guard, a very large fishing fleet with the maritime militia interwoven into it, legal claims on the near seas, but that it all seems to be very well coordinated with the Belt and Road Initiative and the economic and diplomatic moves that go with the Belt and Road Initiative. And I would be interested in your comments in that regard. Okay, and I'll be quiet and let you talk, and then turn it over to Sam.
Okay, well, you gave me a good menu there. The issue of yards, China, in the early years of this century, had literally hundreds or thousands, actually, of small, in the Navy, U.S. Navy, we might call them bicycle shops, shipyards. And then when in 2008, with the economic crisis, there was a great contraction in shipyard around the world, including in China. And so they've been contracting and reducing the plethora of facilities, but building very large and modern, capable shipyards. So my sense is they have the maintenance capability or have the ability to expand it as the fleet expands. One of the things that struck me in doing the research on this was how willing they are to spend a lot of money overhauling older ships, which I would have thought were in the U.S. Navy would have been not, the investment wouldn't have been made and may have been decommissioned. The example, for example, the Sovereign destroyers that they bought from the Russians. They have essentially taken all the Russian equipment off and replaced it with new Chinese equipment, done massive rebuilding of these things, and which had to be horribly expensive in a relative sense. And so they have not shied away from putting a lot of money into rehabilitation of older ships and then recommissioning them and keeping around. So my sense is they're pretty willing, or they are willing to make the investment so far to keep ships around for 30 or 35 years. So now that they have a heck of a lot more newer ones, so I think it remains to be seen if they're willing to also make those investments to update ships that are now, let's say, 15 years old, 16 years old. Are they going to do a big midlife update of those or not? I haven't seen that yet. The issue of professional sailors. This is the perennial question I'm always asked: is how good are they? Well, the answer is, for looking at it from the outside in, they look pretty good. They've been doing 10 years worth of distant deployments, and for a good number of those years, those deployments have lasted 7 months, because after the group of ships would be replaced by the next group coming out, they would do 3 months of port visits around a different part of the world. So some would go to East Africa, some would go to West Africa, some would go to South Asia, et cetera, et cetera. So when these ships got home, on average, they were out 7 months, 210 to 215 days. And so, there are no screaming headlines about X, Y, or Z ship breaking down and having to be replaced and what have you. So now these are relatively new ships. They haven't sent their old ones. These are all ships that have been built since 2005. So based on the outside looking in, they have done a good job of being able to maintain what they have and operate them for extensive cruises. So that has to say something about the professionalism of the sailors. And they have to, and everybody who's visited them on port visits and what have you comes back talking about how clean they are and how squared away the sailors look. And some of the anecdotal information that I've picked up in research about sailors have become quite adept at what we would call naval diplomacy when they get to a foreign port. going off, having sporting events with the hosts, et cetera, et cetera. And so now, in terms of long service technical competence, like our chief petty officers or career enlisted, they're still trying to build a career enlisted force that has the same skill sets that ours do, and I don't think they're there yet. So, and finally, on the coordination between BRI and naval, if you will, a global navy or an expeditionary navy. Well, the Navy got started, or the demand signal for the Navy to grow was in advance of Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative being launched, 6 years ago now, 7 years ago now. And but it is Mahanian in concept with the flag following trade. And so you do see as their going out strategy, as they have more and more business in resources invested, especially including BRI, the demand signal, and with Chinese, as I said, lots of Chinese citizens in Africa, for example, there has been a demand signal that there has to be a way to protect them, as well as protect our interest if somebody would try to damage them. And so there is this traditional, if you will, naval business economic development nexus that exists with China as well as it has historically with other countries.
Admiral, thanks for kind of, as you and I would say, defeating those issues in detail. I'm going to turn it over to Sam. The Q&A box is filling up, and so I'll let Sam manage that and go to questions.
Yes, we have quite a few of great questions. I'm going to try to bundle some of them. There's some questions about Taiwan, a lot on strategy as well as capabilities. So I'll try to start with the few on Taiwan.
Okay.
So Stephen Jenner asked, China may be the largest economy by 2028. Will that be the year they invade Taiwan? And then similarly, Michael Keys asked, does China have sufficient amphibious shipping to invade Taiwan? If not, when are they projected to achieve this? And then finally, Judith asked, if China decides to take Taiwan by force, how long could Taiwan defend itself?
Well, those are all very good questions. Let's start with the question about 2028. I guess I would challenge your premise that the mainland is itching to invade Taiwan. That seems to be the way your question was phrased, that once they have the largest economy, then they're going to turn the PLA loose. China's not looking to start a war. China's not looking to have to fight to gain complete control over Taiwan. It wants it to be done peacefully. And absent a dramatic provocation on the part of Taiwan, I think China would much rather continue to put the pressure on the Democratic People's Party, the DPP, President Tsai Ing-wen, as to, we're going to continue to squeeze you. We're going to continue to put pressure on you to make your life so uncomfortable that eventually you're going to say, all right, let's talk about what kind of a deal we can cut on reunification. That's their hope. That's the mainland's hope. So they'll do lots of huffing and puffing. They'll continue to fly the airplanes around Taiwan, continue to practice amphibious assaults. They have to make sure to demonstrate to Taiwan and to the United States and to Japan and everybody else that when they make a threat that we can use military force, that it's a credible threat. because they believe they are deterring Taiwan's independence. And so their deterrent has to be credible in the eyes of Taiwan. And so they, by demonstrating all of these capabilities they have and their developing their proficiency, that is part of China's effort to deter Taiwan. As a matter of fact, also to deter the United States, that if they do use force, to make Americans think, God, if it's going to be too hard, maybe we don't need to ride to the rescue, or maybe we can't ride to the rescue. If we tried, we'd get whipped. So this is all part of China's deterrent strategy. Amphibious shipping. Again, in the book, what I talk about is that if you think about how China might attack Taiwan, I see it as kind of gradual. It might start with things like cyber attack and other things that don't kill anybody, or at least not intentionally kill anybody, but bring Taiwan's economy to its knees. What if they took out all of the ATM machines in Taiwan, for example, and screwed up with the banking and cut the undersea cable that brings so much of the banking information, high-speed data into Taiwan from abroad? And what if they did all those things? Maybe the people of Taiwan would say, oh, I've had enough. So then possibly the next thing that they would do would be to say, okay, if I have to use force, I can pound them from the air. The combination of ballistic missiles that I have, well over 1,200 that I could use against Taiwan, plus my growing air power, I could destroy Taiwan's air force. I could sink their navy or do great damage to their navy, and I could just pound the blazes out of them, and maybe they would quit then. And I don't even have to risk all of the problems of an amphibious assault. So that's how it might play out, as opposed to, all right, boys, we're just going to start with a landing and go from there. It's hard to say, but are there enough amphibious ships? If you think you're going to use paratroopers and helicopters as well as amphibious, yes, there probably is enough amphibious shipping. Now, remember, they're building amphibious shipping right now as I speak. So there's going to be this is going to be something that's increasing along the way. Those might be the ways, the combination, as I say, paratroops, helicopter troops, and amphibious ships that they would invade, or at least try to grab a bridgehead or a beachhead, and then take up ships from trade. Now, already China's merchant marine, all ships have to be built, at least ro-ro ships and ships that can be used in amphibious operations and support operations to some military specifications. And so roll-on, roll-off ships and what have you could then be used to build up forces if, for example, Kaohsiung was seized. So those would be ways to think about this. And so Taiwan, how long can Taiwan hold out? Well, their oil, they don't have great petroleum shortage. So you can think about what strategic supplies has Taiwan secured already so that they have some endurance. Because China would clearly declare some sort of a combat zone or a war zone around the island and ban shipping from entering, and insurance rates would go up for everybody, but let's say Taiwan-owned ships were going to come in no matter what, the PLA Navy would be out there to try to stop them. And so there would be a way to slowly economically squeeze Taiwan's ability to sustain itself by cutting off, by imposing a blockade. But a blockade takes a long time to have an effect. So I think that China would be pounding away. Now, if the big issue when a U.S. Somebody who's in the government responsible for security issues, or naval officers or commanders who are responsible for security issues, are often asked, well, can reinforcements be here in 2 weeks? Somehow the Taiwans think we can make it in 2 weeks. I don't think we can make it in 2 months. That's a personal opinion. And so Taiwan, and I believe that I've seen things from the KMT, some KMT who said, we need to take a serious look at how long it would take for the U.S. to fight its way across. And so Taiwan has to, if it's planning on holding out, it's going to have to hold out, I would say, for several months.
Thank you, Admiral McDevitt, and thanks so much for all the questions. Please keep them coming. Good segue to a bigger picture question from Professor Susan Shirk. She asked, please help us understand the PLA Navy buildup in the context of world history. How proportionate or overproportionate is it to China's economic needs, or does it indicate aggressive intent?
Well, to answer the last part of that question first, I don't think it indicates aggressive intent per se, so much as just part and parcel of China's developing global power. It's part of the equation. I'm not sure that the Chinese are bound and determined, other than Taiwan and the South China Sea, to invade anybody else. But they want to have the power, I believe, the military power, the naval power, to be able to defend their interests, and they want people to pay attention to them, and they want their near neighbors to not do anything that would be counter to Chinese interests. And so there's an intimidation factor, there's a deterrent factor there. So I don't think they're hell-bent in invading Southeast Asia, for example. But their Navy is not disproportionate. If you think of yourself as a great power, and China clearly does. I'm busy reading I just finished reading a book called China as a Great State, and it talks about China all under heaven's views during the imperial period. Fascinating book. But if you believe that you're a great world power, China thinks it needs a military that's commensurate with it. They've had that in their white papers, that we should have a military that is commensurate with our place in the world. If they think their place in the world is going to be number 1 or number 2, they think that it's appropriate, and they have the resources to satisfy that ambition, to have a military that is of proportionate greatness, that it's right up there with the best of the best. I don't know if I got all parts of Susan's question there, but.
She also asked about historical context of.
Oh, the historical context. Well, the historical context that's most interesting to me as I look back at this bit, what I would say, a little over 20 years, China has gone from a navy of insignificance to the largest in the world and the second most capable, in my judgment, in about 22 years. When has that ever happened before? Well, the first time the historian in me would be the First Punic War, when Rome built a navy and beat the Carthaginians, who had the best navy at the time. And then another occasion, for example, in a very short 20-year period, would be the U.S. Navy from about 1899 or 98 to 1922. When the Washington Treaty limited the size. It went from being the 4th or 5th or 6th rated navy in the world to being tied for number 1 with the British. You could also make the case that Japan, in a very short period of time, from let's say 1895 to 1922, the Washington Conference, went from being a very small regional navy to being a navy that the British and the U.S. felt that we had to constrain to only 60% of the size of the U.S. and the British navies. And so those are three naval transformations that I can think of. Obviously, Wilhelmine Germany is also potentially a case leading up to World War I, but of where over a very short period of time historically, where a country that was not seen as a great naval power became a great naval power.
Great. Our next question is from Steve Clary. First, he says, Happy New Year to Mike and Robert. His question is, a key component of the American Navy strategy of away games is crisis management and deterrence through power projection in the form of carrier battle groups and amphibious ready groups. Are we seeing the PLA Navy developing power projection in addition to its strategy focused on sea lane defense and A2AD? What role do you see for the 3 to 4 carriers the PRC is building?
That's an excellent question. In fact, it's such a good question that the China Security and Economic Review Commission had hearings on it this year. And so if you go to their website, USCC, and look at down their hearing list for 2020, you can see the hearings, what they had expert opinion on the whole issue of China as an expeditionary power. And they had good people there. Admiral Denny Blair was one of their keynote speakers and what have you. So it was in the write-up, and the write-up in their annual report is quite good. But the answer is, I think so. I think China is trying to mimic the U.S. Navy in terms of, they are certainly in the amphibious ready group business, certainly with their now 3 hulls in the water, the Type 75 LPH, that's the U.S. terminology, whatever they call it, a Type 75 ship. Large amphibious ship that will carry Marines and helicopters and what have you, plus the 8 or 9 LPDs that they have. They already have the kernel of having what we would call an amphibious ready group. They could put together 3 of those, a couple of LPDs and one of those LPHs, and they have about 18 5,000-ton LSTs. And you have something that could take 2,500, 3,000 Marines anywhere in the world and stay there. They have the tankers to support it. They have the destroyers to escort it. What don't they have? They don't have an aircraft carrier yet that can provide air cover. And that's why I think they're building aircraft carriers. And I should have mentioned, but I'll do it now. They're spending a lot of effort building aircraft carriers, not very much effort building airplanes to fly off the aircraft carrier. And the reason you need you have an aircraft carrier is so you can fly airplanes off them. So the J-15 that they're using, they only have about 25 or so in inventory. And there's not even enough amongst those handful to fill out the air wings of both the 2 carriers that they have in commission right now. So I think the reason that they haven't done that is they're not very happy with the J-15. They've had some accidents. It's a very heavy airplane. It's a knockoff from a Ukrainian Sukhoi. I think it's landing, it has real difficulty. Its low-speed landing characteristics are not the best for aircraft carrier work. I'm sure their landings are fairly exciting. And as a result, they're looking for a new airplane, but they don't have one yet. And so that's going to be a big impediment to the idea of setting off an amphibious ready group to go enforce your will somewhere. If you don't bring your airplanes with you, you're in deep trouble when you're operating around now. So that means perhaps will we see land-based PLA Air Force in places like Gwadar and Pakistan, or extending the small helicopter field with at the Chinese base in Djibouti right now? I spoke to a professor from Djibouti who gave us a briefing on what's going on there. And he said, oh yeah, they could extend that runway out into the South China Sea. You know, the Chinese are very good at landfill and building islands and runways. So in fact, Djibouti could wind up having a jet-capable airfield. Berbera, remember the Soviets, when they were messing around in that part of the world, in the Horn of Africa, built a 13,000-foot runway in Berbera so that their bombers and ASW aircraft could use it. And so it's not unreasonable to expect that China might be thinking down the road about having to use land-based air power if they're not comfortable enough with carrier-based air power. That's a long answer to your question. I apologize.
So we have time for one more question, which I would draw from a theme that has not been addressed yet, and it is on climate change. Grant Adams asked, he's curious to know if China has factored in climate change into their strategic plan. The low-lying spratleys could become submarines in the next 50 years, for instance. Or another impactful example is worsening weather in the South China Sea, like the hurricane that just hit the Philippines. And weather can affect operations, let alone resource extraction and shipping.
Well, I think the short answer is China is certainly very well aware of the implications broadly, and that would include their strategic considerations of climate change and ocean rise in particular. The issue of building those islands, you know, are they worried about those things being underwater in 25 or 50 years? My guess would be they're not losing too much sleep over it. They're happy about them now. They've got things that they want, and you know, after all, if we could build them right now, there's no reason why we couldn't go in and continue to grade and dump more dirt on them and raise them and keep ahead of the game. I kiddingly say to folks that are talking about worrying about inundation from ocean rising, I hope you're in touch with the Dutch, because you know, they're the people who know how to build dikes and why you have to keep the North Sea at bay. And so that's who a lot of these people are looking at. And we know that China is quite good at civil engineering, and keeping those bases effective is essentially a civil engineering project, and I see no reason why they couldn't do it. Whether they want to or spend the money is another matter, but why they couldn't do it.
Thank you. With that, I'll turn it back over to Robert to close us.
Hey, thanks, Sam. Admiral McDevitt, just a great talk. And for everyone who's participated today, of course, it's recorded. The 21st Century China Center has a very robust program to start 2021. The Institute on Global Conflict and Cooperation also is moving out in that regard. So to have somebody like Admiral McDevitt review his book for us and then give us his insights as we look at the maritime domain and that space as a potential military space, as a diplomatic space, as an economic space, he covered a lot of ground. So again, thanks to everybody for your participation today. Sam, any final administrative comments before we leave the Zoom meeting?
Just a quick invitation to our webinar next week that features Professor Yasheng Huang from MIT. He will be talking about Has the East Risen Again? Lessons from history. Should be fascinating as well. So please join us for that. You can sign up at china.ucst.edu.
Before you sign off, let me just say thank you very much. I much appreciate the opportunity. And I hope in a post-COVID United States, I'll find an excuse to come out to San Diego.
Thanks, boss. Appreciate it.